Good evening. Since I was last with you, we have seen rioting and violence on an horrendous level. The Prime Minister seeks to blame it all purely on the far right. And yes, of course, there are far-right thugs. And some of the actions, such as setting fire or attempting to set fire to hotels with people in them, are truly disgusting and appalling. But we can't say it's all on one side. Last night we saw in some parts of the country mobs of young Muslims masked, acting in a very intimidatory way. Indeed, threatening journalists, slashing tyres, making people from Sky News and LBC flee the scene. We even saw a pub that was surrounded and intimidated. So there's fault on all sides. Street violence is never, ever right. I've spent 30 years fighting elections, some successful, some unsuccessful, because I believe in solving problems via the ballot box. Personally, I have to say I'm pretty disgusted by comments made by people like Andy McDonald from the Labour Party, Anna Soubry, former Conservative MP, broadcasters like James O'Brien on LBC, calling these Farage's riots. People saying, actually, I've been orchestrating, organising, encouraging the riots. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. And because of that level of incitement to hatred against me, I've had to have a very significant change in my security situation over the course of the weekend. But I guess there are some who are frightened that politically one day I could benefit from what is going on. Well, that's not what interests me. What interests me is not just ending these riots and not just quelling them for now. I don't want to live in France, where these divisions occur once every few months, where parts of big French cities effectively almost become no-go zones. I want to find long-term solutions. And one of the problems here, at least one of the perceived problems here, is two-tier policing. Now, right or not, and we'll debate that in just a moment, but right or not, there is a widespread perception of two-tier policing. I believe it began at the time of the Black Lives Matters protests. You know, we saw people literally tearing down statues and chucking them in the dock and nobody actually being stopped from doing it. We saw Churchill's statue defaced. We saw the cenotaph defiled and police officers taking a knee in the street, supporting a Marxist organisation. And it goes on from there to a common perception that the way the riots in Leeds were handled compared to the way the riots in Southport were handled were very, very different. None of this, folks, is aimed at all at the men or women on the front line. And frankly, it is truly appalling how many police officers have been hurt over the course of the last few days. Do we have two-tier policing? Are we led by two-tier Keir? That's our debate to begin this evening. I'm joined by former Detective Chief Inspector in the Met Police, Peter Kirkham, and my panel this evening is Andrew Rosendale, Conservative Member of Parliament for Romford, and Paul Richards, not only a former Labour Special Advisor, but also somebody who ran to be a Police and Crime Commissioner. Peter, good evening.
Good evening.
Do you understand why, when it comes to how riots are dealt with, but equally, even on things like stop and search, you know, there is a perception that the police say, well, actually, you know, there's a lot of black people in this area. If we do stop and search, they'll call us racist and horrible names. It has to be true to a certain extent that the police deal with different communities in different ways.
The perception is certainly there. Personally, I don't think there is two-tier policing. I think the police do their best to do policing in the same way, whoever it is they're dealing with at that particular time. But there are difficulties and there are practical issues that arise, and the criticism that they get in relation to certain activities tends to be applied across the board. If they're going to be put off stop and search, they'll be put off stop and search of anybody. And we've seen the numbers of stop and searches very drastically reduced.
Whilst the use of knife crime increases.
Absolutely. Because the Tory-led government since 2010, and Theresa May in particular, really hammered the police about misuse of stop and search as she saw it. There are things that are significantly wrong with that criticism. There are some of the facts that are relied on and are almost tablets of stone, articles of faith about the disproportionality and things like that that just simply are not true. But we never have that conversation. We have the same conversation about it every 6 months or so, and I've been having it for 40 years. We go round in the same circle and we come to the same place.
Let's have a think about the Palestinian marches that happened in London repeatedly, Saturday after Saturday after Saturday, with chants, I mean, frankly, genocidal chants from the river to the sea. And it would appear to anyone watching, as I say, I'm not blaming individual frontline men and women doing their job as police. They've got a hell of a tough job and dangerous job. These are big operational decisions. That kind of chanting, that kind of behaviour was allowed to go on for months without it ever being challenged. And yet, you know, if there was a group of what were seen to be far-right football supporters chanting unpleasant things in the street, they would get dealt with.
They would, to a certain extent. But again, we see that the police, confronted with a crowd who are all doing things that might merit some intervention if it was on an individual level, are not in a position to intervene once it's scaled up and there's 20 or 100 or 200 people doing the same sort of thing. And it's become, since the use of CCTV, and the police have CCTV that they're using at all these demonstrations, the main tactic they have adopted is if somebody needs arresting there and then to prevent very serious harm, they'll do that, obviously. But otherwise, more minor infractions, not necessarily minor in absolute terms, but more minor, will be allowed to run, and then they'll pick them up later from the CCTV images and the intelligence gathering afterwards. And we've seen it for many, many years now. And it's an effective tactic so far as it goes, because every time you arrest somebody in a demonstration, protest, riot situation, you're taking at least 2, possibly more officers away from the front line and trying to quell that disorder to deal with the prisoners. That's just not practical.
I'm not pretending it's easy.
It's not easy, it's not possible.
And that's because the police are outnumbered physically?
Partially, yes, but the practicalities of arresting 200 people simultaneously is just, it's impossible.
Now, we're told there are 39 protests planned tomorrow night around the country. That's what we're told. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. What should the police tactics be?
The police tactics should be what they are now. Gather as much as intelligence as possible on each one. Try to deploy the resources they've got as best they can to deal with the threats that they prioritise in all the various different locations, and then see what develops and deal with that as it happens. If there are scenes that lead them to believe it's going to get worse, try and intervene at an early stage. It's easier to intervene earlier rather than later, disperse people if they can, and such like. But the difficulty they've got is with social media, with modern communication methods, those intent on causing damage, destruction and assault, they have got the means to move around and be in different places and coordinate each other as much as the police, if not more so.
Should people be allowed to go around in masked mobs intimidating people?
I think the masking of people in protest situations or generally is a bit of an issue. I don't think it's the whole issue.
Because CCTV can't catch up with those people.
It can, but not by facial recognition, but by clothing and by other means of identifying people. It can, but it's not as good as facial recognition, obviously. So,
all right, I put it to you again that the perception, common perception, one that's grown in the last few weeks, particularly when you see the operational decisions that were taken in Leeds compared to the operational decisions that were taken in Southport, and yes, I accept the different circumstances, but I put it to you that fear of being called racist means our police force police different communities in different ways.
That's not the reason at all. The police are not going to be dealing with things differently on that basis. But that perception comes from the comments of people in responsible positions, and I have to point at you to a certain extent.
It's fine.
You need to be extremely careful about what you say and how you say it and how it will be perceived. You're portrayed as an alternative source of the truth because the BBC and the police can't be relied upon. So you need to be very, very careful that what you're saying is true, accurate and properly sourced.
When that monster killed those 3 little girls,
yep,
and there are others still very serious.
Horrendous attack.
I was waiting. I wanted to hear very quickly who the attacker was. Was this somebody that had been on a police watch list? Because often we hear these things very quickly after terrorist attacks or whatever it may be.
We rarely hear it from the police very quickly.
Well, we'll hear it from some source, whether it's the Home Office, whether it's the police, I don't know. What was interesting and wrong was the levels of speculation. Had the bloke arrived on a boat last year? Was he a Muslim activist? That could all have been quelled.
Neither of which were true.
Neither, completely untrue, and yet fuelled what happened in Southport.
Absolutely.
Don't we need the police and the Home Office and others to give us as much information about people like that as quickly as possible?
We do, and the police are well aware of that, and they're well aware that the absence of information leaves a vacuum that's filled by all sorts of speculation.
Yes.
And they try to do that. I was a Detective Chief Inspector investigating murders, and I had cameras pointed at me within half an hour of arriving at the scene. On arrival at the scene sometimes. What's happening? I don't know, I've just got him. The bottom line is facts take time. And the police, for legal as well as more general reasons, have to get it right. If they say something, they have to be satisfied they get it right. There have been occasions over the years where they've said things that haven't been right, and it's gone back to bite them big time. Well, so facts take time, and we need to be patient.
Some more rapid facts would have helped in Southport, I think.
They would. Facts, but not speculation.
No.
Police.
Two-tier policing, Andrew Rosendale, what's your take?
The police are there to protect the public, and they have to apply the law equally to all people. This is the laws of this country that should apply equally to every citizen and to all communities. If we get to a stage where the public are losing confidence that the police are applying that law equally, we have a serious problem on our hands.
Is that where we are?
I think that many people do think so. We've seen how the aggressive marches through London about Gaza, we've seen how they've been policed, compared to other types of protests and marches where the police have seemed to have been much more aggressive towards those who are protesting. It's not a good look. Now, I support the police, and we must support the police. They're there to do a job to protect our country and to protect the law-abiding citizens. But too much politics has been going on in the police for too long. They've been too politicised. I want them to get back to doing the job that the British people want them to do, to treat everyone equally and to ensure that the law is obeyed by all.
And I must ask Paul, your take on this.
Well, the big mistake the government made after 2010 was to cut all those police numbers off our streets in the first place.
We get some support from Peter on that point.
We lost a generation of coppers with real street smarts and experience, and we have slowly replaced them, but by definition by younger and less experienced. You voted for that, by the way. And that we've been reaping the whirlwind ever since in terms of shoplifting, the inability to police rioting, people being burgled and the police don't turn up, and all of those things have happened because we decided as a nation to take the police off our streets. Now, that was the mistake we made, and we are here now talking about the things we're talking about because of that.
Well, I want to say a huge thanks, Peter Kirkham, for coming in, for making those arguments, and do come back to us in the next few days as we see how the police handle these things and most important of all, the perception of the police, because it is really, really important.